Well, it's Monday, so I guess that means it's time to get down to business and discuss more bundle chains in World of Warships Legends. Behold the Tier 7 Premium Commonwealth Destroyer HMCS Huron, which I believe is supposed to be a Canadian ship, much like the battleship Yukon. And not coincidentally, both the Yukon and Huron are only obtainable at the moment, as of December 2025, in a random bundle chain, which you can find in the winter holiday section of the store under the subheading It's Shipmas tab. The bundle chain is called Waves of the North, if you forgot from the Yukon video. Each set in the bundle chain costs 750 doubloons. If you want to buy all of the sets, it's 52,500 doubloons. Just a disclaimer, the Yukon is not worth that price, neither is the Huron. If you're lucky enough to get it early in the bundle set for only a couple thousand doubloons, then maybe. But I don't think this ship is especially impressive, although I have seen some thumbnails on the YouTube lately that seem to indicate opinions to the contrary. We'll run down the stats and I'll tell you why I think what I do, but I'll also show you my commander build. There's only one commander, Hector Waller. This build is mostly set up as the Zombie Vampire 2 build, but it does work for the Huron. There's maybe some alterations you want to make to it in order to fit it to this particular destroyer instead of the Vampire 2, but for the purposes of testing out the Huron, this build was working well enough for me, so I didn't really feel the need to change it all that much. Now, we'll run down the specs, and as this battle develops, I'm going to point out to you something about the Huron being bugged. It was bugged, at least at the time I recorded this gameplay footage. I told Wargaming about it. I don't know if they fixed it. Haven't really seen any word from them. But I think this is a fairly common bug that has existed in the game for some time and has to do with the Propulsion mod on basically British ships. We're running the Propulsion mod on the Huron, and it is a British design destroyer, so it's got that built-in British acceleration, and the bug, I believe, centers around that. Anyway, we'll get to that later. To begin with, the survivability of Huron. It doesn't have a lot of HP. We're not using Sims as an inspiration. Instead, in Waller's legendary skill row, we've got the Steadfast Soldier skill, which gives us some more HP to the tune of 6% at legendary level 3. And because of that, we've got 18,760 HP, although base, this thing comes with 17,700. Not exactly lighting the world on fire in terms of HP numbers, but we do get a heal, a rare enough thing for a destroyer. It's not a very good heal, only lasts 10 seconds and restores 187 HP per second. So it's barely anything, but at least you have some ability to reacquire hit points after you lose them. The main battery, which you've seen in action here against the Georgia for some time now, has 6 120mm guns, pretty small, typical British destroyer size. And with this build, we've got a range of 11.2 and a reload time of 3.4 seconds, with a fairly slow turret traverse speed of 14.1. Now, these guns are somewhat special, you could say. The HE is not all that unusual. It has a maximum HE shell alpha damage of 1,760, which is fine, I suppose, and a 7% fire chance, which actually sounds pretty good and makes it capable of lighting a lot of fires, but it's the AP that's really special here. The AP has a maximum single shell alpha of 2,500, which is pretty large numbers, and you can see that here in action against the destroyer. Because these guns are so small, they do tend to get a lot of full pens on destroyers, so they do more damage than the HE does against them. And on top of that, these things have absurdly improved pen angles for the AP. They've got a minimum ricochet angle of 60 degrees and a guaranteed ricochet angle of 67.5. That's nearly 70 degrees before they will guaranteed ricochet. Very steep angle. These are perhaps some of the best AP pen angles in the game. Now, they are on small guns, so it's not like you're going to be dev striking things, but they do allow you to pen, especially destroyers, and the AP is quite lethal against them. You also don't want to give it broadside in anything light enough for the AP to pen, like a cruiser or even a lightly armored broadside battleship. The AP can shave off a lot of damage in pretty quick order. We've also got a secondary gun, though. It's on the back on a platform above the rear turret. And by the way, to get all three of the actual main gun turrets on target, you have to give an awful lot of broadside, which I don't really like. But the maneuverability on this thing is great. We'll get to that in a moment. And I think the maneuverability makes that, more possible. Anyway, the secondary, it has a range of 5.2 kilometers. So I suppose it allows you the potential to get a close quarters expert in a destroyer in really rare circumstances. I'm sure people who obtain this ship are going to try and do that. It's something you could also do on the Cossack. In fact, I think this destroyer might be the same class, same tribal class as the Cossack, which is why it's got that secondary turret. But there's no universe in which you should build for this thing. The secondary does 1,500 damage per shell. It's got a 7% fire chance. It's just kind of there. It's not really something you should pay that much attention to. But then we've got torpedoes. And much like the Cossack that I was just talking about, this thing only has one torpedo launcher, and it launches 4 torps. They've got a range of 8.3 kilometers, which is not especially far. They go at 62 knots in the water, which is not especially fast, but they do 16,529 maximum simulated damage, whatever that means. So, they hit fairly hard, and they reload in 96 seconds, which, you don't have to wait too long to get them back. Also, speaking of torpedoes, we have sonar. It's the typical British sonar, so it's not got the greatest ship acquisition range at only 4 kilometers. And it acquires torpedoes at 3, lasts for 100 seconds. Actually, that's a lot shorter than the typical British sonar. And come to think of it, I don't think the typical British self-defense sonar on DDs necessarily has a 4 km ship acquisition range. So, the sonar is there. I suppose you could use it to push smoke screens, but really I think it's just for providing utility for yourself and your teammates in the form of spotting torps. And we also have an engine boost, which is about to run out. Here's the bug, by the way. Take a look at the speed. You see how the engine boost runs out and our speed increases to almost 50 knots. I think it's going to top out at 40, but as soon as we turn, that seems to eliminate the bug. Either we turn or we change the speed on the throttle, then the speed goes back down to normal. I think this is some sort of bug with the built-in British propulsion and the propulsion mod. I think, in fact, this bug might have been in the game since the early days, because I recall years ago, HMS Lightning had access to the propulsion mod, if I'm remembering this correctly. And this bug might have been present there, so they removed propulsion mod from Lightning and the rest of the British destroyers in order to quote-unquote fix the bug, but the bug remains in the game. I don't think it's like a terribly game-breaking bug, it's more just of a interesting curiosity, but yeah, you use your engine boost, it runs out, your speed increases until you mess with the rudder or the throttle, at which point it goes back down to normal. I suppose that would allow you for some interesting map traversal much quicker than you should be able to. So, just keep that in mind. Maybe someday the bug will be fixed. I did tell Wargaming about it. They'll probably see this video, so they know exactly what I'm talking about. Who knows if they'll get to it. Anyway, back to the specs. We've covered the torpedoes. The AA defense is not worth going over. This thing's got a fair number of AA guns, but I don't think they can actually shoot down any planes, so let's move on to an actual highlight, which is the maneuverability. And that, at the very least, is quite good. We've got, with the speed flag, keep in mind, we've got a top speed of 37.6 knots. That's before the engine boost, of course, which you've seen what that can do, and it's a special engine boost. It's like a French one. 15% engine buff bonus, you could say. and it lasts for 120 seconds. So with that active, you can be going in excess of 40 knots. I think it tops out around 43 or 44 until the engine boost runs out and the bug takes effect, of course. But that's pretty fast. That gets you up to speeds similar to the French destroyers and even things like the Tashkent. So maybe you can be a bit of an open water gunboat in some cases. Although the Tashkent and the French destroyers, they have better ballistics and larger guns, so their guns are easier to aim at distance. Not so much with the Huron. I don't know how much mileage you'll get out of being an open water gunboat, which is why I haven't really bothered speccing into the range far past 11.2 km. But the real specialty of this thing is in these kind of close quarters knife fights, like you see here against USS Laffey. The AP, in spite of the overpens you're seeing here on occasion, is excellent and is absolutely lethal to destroyers. We've got some help from our teammates as well, but we do end up taking out USS Laffey. And that is what this thing is mostly designed for, in my mind, is winning knife fights with its AP against enemy destroyers. That's about, I don't want to say that's all it's good for, but it's certainly not a crazy damage farmer like some other destroyers at the tier might be. Instead, it's the kind of destroyer that you could take out and be satisfied in the knowledge that you have the tools to deal with even some of the best gunboats at Tier 7 on the enemy team. And sometimes all you really need to do to win a game when you're playing a destroyer is number 1, provide intelligence data for your team, and number 2, counter the enemy destroyers. Not necessarily in that order. Of course, you should be going for the caps as well, but when you have guns like this with a snappy reload and excellent AP characteristics, it's very good at dealing with enemy destroyers, and that might be enough to win you the game. And of course, if you are in a close quarters knife fight, you've got that speed of 37.6 knots with the 15% engine boost if you'd like, and then you've got a small turning circle of 630 meters and a 4-second rudder shift. So, pretty maneuverable. As for the concealment, that's a bit of a low light here, but that's because we've chosen not to really spec into it on our build. We've got a 6-kilometer detect, and I suppose that's not ideal. A lot of things are going to outspot you, so that can make it tricky if you are trying to counter destroyers. It might be better to not spec so much into the survivability like I have, using Trubetskoy and Bergamini as inspirations. Trubetskoy, of course, reduces incoming damage that you take, and so does Bergamini, but his buff scales as you lose HP. The more HP you lose, the more of a nerf there is to incoming damage. So those together, along with the heal, even though our HP is not all that impressive, make this a fairly tanky destroyer. And of course, Hector Waller's build is designed to make the thing as tanky as possible, which is what I think you need if your whole goal is going to be to knife fight enemy destroyers and win battles that way. And that seems to be the strategy for HMCS Huron. So it's a decent ship, of course. I don't think it's like the best ship in the game. I think the AP is pretty cracked in terms of its pen angles, but that's not enough to make the whole ship itself cracked. And as for this battle, what you see here is pretty representative of my experience in the ship. It's not exactly high damage, only 63,000. We might shave a little bit more HP off this Lexington before he goes down, but I don't remember if we do. So only 63,000, 1 kill, 3 fists, but a lot of damage that we did was against the enemy destroyers. And as a consequence, we're going to have some pretty high XP at the end of the battle. And of course, sinking enemy destroyers or damaging them at all, that's probably the most valuable thing you can do in the game. And the Huron is very good at doing it. So it's a nice ship. It's a unique one with its AP pen angles, but I don't think it's going to light the world on fire, and I don't recommend buying into the bundle chain to pursue it. I don't think you should feel any FOMO about this thing. If you don't have it, I don't think it's a ship that, is really going to be super desired like the Incomparable might be, for example. but it's decent. So, hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.